Hello, Sandy. Happy podcast day.
Week number three, Amy. I'm
Week
excited
number
for this
three.
one. Had to do a little homework for this one and went down ferret holes.
Me too. Me too. So today we're talking about statistics because you and I, at the closing of the last podcast, I had stumbled across a statistic that I shared with you. And I was like, that would be interesting to do a whole podcast on these statistics that change your perspective on something. So that's what we're talking about today. How'd
And
your research go?
it was good. I started very randomly. I shared a statistic with Amy that I was trying to find the backing to it, and I never did find it. Um, and so I started there, and I'll share that one a little bit later, even though
Yeah.
that one won't have a reference point to it. And then it was interesting because my husband came in and he's like, what are you looking at? And I'll reference which one particular it was that he saw. And when we were in the hot tub, I was sharing with him some of these statistics that hit high on my list of ones to discuss. He's like, oh, he kept asking more questions and he found it very interesting. And I thought, okay, look at back to perspective and conversation. It brought up a lot of interesting conversations. So
Ditto. I found one stat that I was like, oh, that can't be right. And so I started digging into it and I shared it with some friends we went out to eat with Saturday night. And they were all like, that's wrong. It shouldn't be like, that can't be right. And I was like, I researched it some more and it's true. And I was like, that's sad. It's a sad state. So, what do you want to start with? I'll let you do your stat. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go back and forth and
mhm.
we'll talk about each one and what we thought or what we think. And we haven't introduced our stats to each other for this.
No,
So this is a very an organic conversation. So we're hoping our listeners will get something out of this and find some
we
interesting tidbits.
we really like organic conversations. So we have to quit, not talk too much before we start podcasting. It's like, oh, wait, we'll wait till the podcast. So my number one stat that kind of blew me away and had me really digging deeper into it was uh, this comes from the CDC, and it was as of 2018 because of when they do their statistical compilations. The percent of women over the age of 20 that are obese, not overweight, obese. Okay. So what they do is they look at normal weight, overweight. Overweight is over, and everything is by BMI, is over 25 BMI. And then obese is over 30. And they actually have three classifications of obese: level 1, 2, and 3. But percent of women 20 and over that are obese is 42%.
Wow.
And what I went back to is they had a chart. So I love data. And
Yeah.
so, you can read articles and some of them pull the data that you're looking for. And I'm like, this is when they started compiling. So they had 20. How did that change in 20 years? So this is what I really found uh, in very, very, very mind blowing is that 20 years ago, in 1988, it was 25%. It's gone up 17% in 20 years. And the reason that meant something to me too is I lived in both of those eras, right? Like I can go back to 88. That's when I was finishing college, in college. And I know, like, I'm trying to picture saying, how much has this changed? I would not have guessed that, Amy. I would have guessed it would have increased. I think I would have guessed it would have increased by 5% if somebody were to ask me. And I think I would have said that it was 20% and now it's 25. And I would have thought that to be high. And
So I'm just trying to, so a BMI of 30 or above is obese. So if you have, I'm trying to figure that out, like what that looks like on like a 5'7" female. Like what's that weight?
I don't know because the biggest thing with them, I guess we can figure that out. Let's see.
Hold on, I can do it.
5. Okay.
I've got a little calculator here because,
It is 30. I'm looking up. I went back just to make sure that I'm saying the stats right.
all right. So on a 5'8", it's 200 pounds.
I would tell you, for me, the 25 BMI is when I start feeling overweight. So I've never, so that was like, I was like, okay, 25, that's kind of I need to lose some weight.
Yeah.
I'm over what I should be. But I don't know. This
It's
is
actually 197 is 30. So, and 42% of women have a higher 30 or higher BMI.
correct. As opposed to 25% 20 years ago. And then one other, so the male, this is what I found interesting too. Their BMI actually went up by even, they're lower. 40% are the 30 BMI or over. But what changed in the 20 years is they used to be way below women. They used to be at 20%. So they increased by more, but the delta between men and women is only 2%.
Yeah.
Different. It used to be men tended to be leaner than women, but they increased by even more. So
Right.
I saw the women's stat, but then what was interesting is it's kind of the same, and men have fallen more into that sector.
So I'm curious, was there anything that said why? What the reasons are? I mean, I've got some ideas, but
So one thing that I went to, I only looked at the numbers. I didn't dig. Of course, Garrett and I speculated when we were in the hot tub.
Right.
And one thing that I thought was interesting too, because we all know the comments that people make, oh, it's because we know that, the poor people, the more people in the poverty level are eating worse food. But do you know that the biggest increase in BMI, the biggest percentage jump was from those twice over the poverty level. And the second biggest jump was those 400% over the poverty level. So, and I would tell you, at poverty and below was already at a higher level. Now they're actually, everyone is about the same. The playing field is evened out in those 20 years. And then age group was interesting too, because the biggest jump was 20 to 34. That used to be that was by far the lowest, were females 20 to 34. And it used to be 18%, and it's gone up to 35% for that age group. So that's a 92% climb.
Interesting. So speculation. What did you guys speculate?
I'm not, one thing I did tie it back to was our last conversation about do not stand in front of that mirror.
Yeah.
I think it was not okay when I was 20 in 1988 to even be 2 pounds overweight. My friend sent me a picture of me hugging a bottle of Tab. I ate chewing gum and Tab. I find that generation will embrace their curves way more than we did. I mean, it's much more accepted. Be okay with your body and not have it be some disability. It's, the comment that I'd make, Amy, is the advertisements I get for workout clothes, for even Stitch Fix over the last 10 years, is they have all weight sizes and I tell you, from obese to very obese to slightly overweight, it is all shapes and sizes. Yeah. And I do think people do not obsess over their weight as much.
I think that's a good thing, is this level of self-acceptance that's happening now. I also think of my childhood in the 80s versus my children's childhood. And we didn't have cable TV. We had 3 channels, and they were very boring most of the time. You know what I mean?
Like a very streaming.
Exactly. There was no streaming. There was no
constant video games.
Content video game. Like we had to figure out what to do with our time. And a lot of it was going outside and going for a walk, or going to hang out with friends, or or like I had horses. I remember going out riding horses. Like we were outside, we had to go do something if we
And that
were
was our
bored.
go-to. That was our
Yeah,
go. It was
yeah,
like, remember the A Cat in the Hat book? They were so depressed because they couldn't go outside today. What are we going to do?
yeah,
Whereas, it totally, we talked about that too.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it'd be now that again, I try to look at the raw stats. This one didn't have an article. I found the stat and then I was digging into the CDC because breakdowns, because they did it by black, white, Hispanic. And I tell you, it's the same thing there. It used to be higher in the minority, and what's happened is the Caucasian has caught up.
Yeah.
So they had the bigger leaps. It's
Interesting.
become more of an even playing field. So
Interesting. Very interesting. All right. Well, that's perspective changing.
mhm. And one thing that is a little depressing, the last thing on the stat is it was women 75 and older that were actually kind of holding their own more, had the less sleep. And as Garrett and I talked, we said, I wonder how much of that is because people, the people that are heavier aren't living to that age. What is it changing the lifespan? Again, I'd have to dig into the research. I don't know.
Right.
But that's
Okay.
another thing that jumped out to me.
Yeah. Interesting.
Is it affecting that? All right, what's yours, Amy? What was your number one?
My number one was there are more prisons than colleges in the US.
What?
Right. Exactly. And I dug in,
We have a prison problem.
and it is
Gosh.
there are 2.3 million prisoners in the US, and that means a national incarceration rate of 707 adults per every 1,000 residents. And it's the highest in the world by a huge margin.
And any idea on a comparison? Like, do you have any idea what this was 20 years ago, 50 years ago?
So no, it did not go into historical.
I,
Um, and to put the figures in context, we have more jails and prisons in the US, 5,000 plus. So we have over 5,000 jails and prisons in the US, which is more than colleges and universities, degree granting colleges and universities. So there's more people living in prisons than on college campuses.
I thought I had read, of course, I don't have the stat in front of me, that a lot of the number of people in prison really rose when they did. I think this is a Malcolm Gladwell actually podcast, revisionist history, when they did Three Strikes You're Out. And even though very good intent, it did have some really bad outcomes.
Yeah.
And then now we have legalized marijuana, which how many people are in there for marijuana? There's a lot of deep things in, but that stat, back to perspective, knowing that stat, and when I hear these other tidbits, it puts my thought in a different perspective in knowing that.
Right. And I just think as a society, we don't do a really good job in childhood and teenage years and to support people and get them out of these cycles. Like there's not enough resources to do, to make a difference. It's just it's heartbreaking. And I know there's always going to be people who tend to be more inclined to break the law and stuff like that, but just the resources to help to people get out of that cycle.
Right. Instead of going straight to imprisonment. I with issues, the answers aren't easy, and bringing things up, it's not to be political, not to say what's right or wrong, but I always get back to, I don't know where it came from, but Glennon Doyle brought it up in her book on when you're pulling people out of the river, you need to go and find out where they're jumping in and why. Rather than just finding a whole army to pull them out, keep pulling them out of the river, you got to find out why. And that's the hard part. That's the hard part in whether it be the obesity, whether it be the prison. It's not saying, oh my gosh, we need to change. But in order to know the change, you have to figure out the why and correct the problem. That's the heavy lifting.
And I think we really skimp on encouraging people to be in the roles that can make differences in these children's lives. Like, we don't pay our teachers well. We don't pay social workers well. We don't, like, there's so much in that youth infrastructure that we're just like, it's good. You know what I mean? Like, let's invest in building another prison instead. It's like, instead of investing in developing people and making them better people. So that was my shocking
Follow
statistic.
the dollar and you will have the answer. It always shocked me when I worked in the finance world, in the public finance world, the businesses that would have contracts to, I mean, there's people that make a lot of money off of building prisons, and you would be shocked if you followed the dollar where money is going, because the people that are employed there aren't the ones making the money. So,
Right.
because I know, my husband, my first husband, before he was in law enforcement, he worked in the correction, and that's hard work.
Yeah.
That's stressful work, and it doesn't pay very much money. So,
Well, the other thing that this said was that they did it over the whole United States for the population. The stat that I said, for every 400, let me see, for every 707 adults for every 1,000 residents. And they did it nationwide because they showed the population and where most of the people are incarcerated.
okay.
And they said in some of the areas, they didn't do a percentage because it could be as much as 30% of the population is a prison population.
Wow.
Because they're sticking, them in smaller towns. They're more, I was just like, whew. So anyway, interesting. More prisons than colleges in the United States.
Wow. Wow. Okay,
All right, what's your next one?
my next one was the one where my husband's like, what are you researching? Well, I was researching divorce rates because I was curious. But here's what I was curious on is, has divorce gone up after COVID? Is that an effect of COVID?
Yeah.
And what I found out was, it's, first of all, to answer that question, it's too early to tell, because the divorces that were impacted by COVID, you have to go through the whole process. Those stats will probably come in the next 1 to 2 years. What they do know is domestic violence is up, domestic violence is up. And what was the other thing that they said? Counseling was up. I mean,
I was going to say probably counseling and therapy.
yeah, counseling and therapy was up. So they knew those. The other thing that I noticed was, when I researched it, there's so many divorce sites get into being a divorce lawyer. Like, they're seeing this as going to be a thriving industry. But here's the stat that was surprising to me. Did you know that it's pretty common that people say, 50% of marriages end in divorce? That's an 80s stat. Do you know it actually went down? It's 40% now.
Oh, really?
That surprised me. And do you want to know why?
Why? Right.
It's actually gone up in 40 and older, because it used to be that if you made it that far, you didn't get divorced as much. People look at, like Garrett and I said, a lot more people like us that get their kids to that point, and they're like, I'm going to get divorced. The millennials aren't getting married.
That's what I
was waiting to get married, and they're more solid. So their rate has gone down because of twofold: not divorcing as much and not getting married as much.
Interesting.
The other stat that I want to wait for is,
so did you, by chance, really quick question, like the marriage rate, how did you get a number of how much it's dropped versus
I did not get that.
I did not. Curious. Okay.
I looked at that. It was, here's something. So a couple of things with the divorce rate. Nevada has the highest divorce rate. Sounds right. Iowa is the lowest. Couples are more likely to break up if one partner is a heavy drinker and the other doesn't drink. Do you know that every 36 seconds there's a divorce in the United States? How about that? But I do not know the marriage rates, but that'd be a good one to look up. Oh, here's a good one. This one shocked me, and I'll stop on the divorce because I threw this one to Gary. He's like, "Ooh, parents that are in poverty or below, poverty rate or below, only 8% that are living together are 8% of parents living in poverty are married, 16% are cohabiting. So double the amount are living together as parents rather than getting married.
Interesting.
And only 8%
Are getting married.
are getting married.
And only 8 plus 16, which is
Are
22,
together as a two.
are actually together.
Yeah.
Well, that's
There you
interesting.
go on divorce. How about that?
Wow.
I was looking for, so back to perspective, I was looking for a stat that went up. We are now at 55%. And what I found was I don't have a stat on COVID, number one, and number two, it's actually gone down. But yeah, I need to research that one a little bit more.
Well, so I just pulled something up because I'm trying to see.
Okay.
So looking at it divides it up by all regions. I'm wondering if I can do it here. Marriage per 1,000. The marriage rate per 1,000. Today it is at, hold on, 6.5 marriages per 1,000 people. This is 2018. Okay. And in in the 50s, it was at 12. And in the, it looks like the 40s, it was at 16. World War II, probably, whoop, really high, but it's definitely going down all the way down in the graph. It's like a,
And it's got to help too, not only going down, but waiting, right? To be
yep. Interesting.
Yep, interesting. All right.
Very interesting.
Look, we got divorce, obesity, jails. What's next, Amy? What's next?
All right. This was the one that started this whole conversation. Was the average person spends 93% of their life inside. And this is inside, not being outside. So it could be inside a car, inside your house, inside an office. It's just not being outside in nature or anything. So if you live to be 100 years old, you will spend 93 years of your life inside.
It's just mind blowing.
I know, isn't that mind blowing? I just can't. Do you spend a lot of time outside?
I do. And then I try to think, okay, think of my 24-hour day, how much I spend sleeping in bed. Once it gets dark out, that's half the day, right? So I'm like, okay, that's 50%. When I go back and look, because I do keep from our Atomic Habits, I do keep a journal every day. Yep. I think I spend a lot of time outside, but it's amazing how I'll sit at the computer for 4 hours and then go out for 15. I think I disproportionately believe I'm outside more than I am.
So I'm looking at the 93% of your day would be 22.3 hours. So that would leave an hour and 40 minutes a day that you're outside.
I'm definitely more than that. But I think I would tell you that I would say, oh, I'm spending 5 hours a day outside. In reality, it's probably more like 3.
Yeah, that's the interesting, because I'm like, oh, 93%. And then I start adding up, okay, I go for my walk every day. I usually spend some time, like I do breaks. If the weather's okay, I sit outside on my patio. Like I'll take a 10-minute, probably 3 or 4 times a day, where I go and sit outside for 10 minutes and just with no devices or anything, and just kind of calm down. Not calm down. It's not like I need to calm down, but it's just like reconnect. I would say reconnect more than calm down. But I think I am actually at that 93%, because even adding all of that up, unless I play golf, or
Right.
unless we do an evening out on the patio, which we do a few times a week,
Mhm.
but Yeah.
So I think I feel like I'm outside a lot. I mean, look at, if anybody's on the video, my office, I've got light
Yeah.
everywhere and I'm opened up. We don't have air conditioning. We open
Yeah.
up our house. And so it's almost like it gives me an optical illusion of thinking I'm outdoors all the time, probably even where I'm situated, right?
Right.
Would you
Yep.
feel differently if I had the exact same percentage as somebody who lived in an apartment in New York City? Would we have different perspectives out of our mind's eye of how much time we're spending outside because of the proximity of our homes? I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's just an interesting thought that we spend that much time inside. And I'm completely acknowledge that that's probably true. And then I think about weekends, maybe I spend more outside anyway, you know, it ebbs and flows here
Mhm.
depending on my days. Okay, what's your next one?
You know what? I'll bring up the stat that I brought up when, just like you brought up this, we're like,
Yeah.
wow, why we came to this conversation was the stat that was that I had heard was that 80% of women form their close friendships over something negative. They bond over something bad that happened in their life or relationship. They bond over something negative. Whereas with men, it's only 20%. Men are the flip side. They bond over their passions, over positive things, over golf, over things that they have a good working relationship, but men tend to bond over positive things and women tend to bond over negative things. And I thought about it, I'm like, there's a lot of truth to that if I think back to different where my friendships started or what we bonded over. Not always, but I that one changed my perspective because I'd never thought about that before. Never thought about that.
So that was interesting to me too. And I started thinking about support groups and I started thinking about, I remember a while, well, geez, probably 20 years ago, a friend of mine had a child going through cancer and he came out,
Right.
he did okay. And I remember she was doing a support group on her own. Like she was attending, her spouse didn't attend. He was fine, but she was like going to that group and it seemed like I don't know this for a fact, but she was connecting with a lot of other moms who were going through the same thing. And so she needed that. And, which is just an interesting, I wonder like in support groups, if it's more women sitting there than men.
And Amy, I'll tell you, when I heard this stat, my initial reaction was thinking, oh my gosh, women need to, but my perspective has changed because I think it's not a bad, is it a bad thing? Is the first thing I thought about. And I've decided it's not, it's how women and men are wired in general. Again, I don't like to categorize people because I used to laugh, I talked to a guy that went golfing and they spent the entire day golfing with someone and the daughter was having some health issues. Well, how's the daughter? Well, I never asked. Never asked, right? So that's the example. It's just so it isn't a negative one way or the other. It's a reality that there's some innate wiring differences that aren't nothing is ever blanket, but
Yeah.
women tend to they support each other and gain friendships from that. My husband would much rather just talk to me about it.
Yeah. And it's kind of that men are from Mars, women are from Venus, kind of, it just is what it is. There's no good or bad to it. It's just, we're all wired a little differently.
So that one, it was good for me to marinate on that a little bit. And I like your point because when I thought about it, it's like, this sounds like it's such a terrible thing. We women, 1 point against us. What are we doing? And I thought, no, it's not. It's a reality that if Garrett comes home from a bike ride and he has no information on what's going on in the other person's life, that's okay. He says his passions aren't social, it's to push each other.
Yeah.
When I'm doing things, especially athletic, there's a lot of social with it for me
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot of conversation.
Yeah. Interesting. That's interesting. All right. So we have a few more minutes. So I'm trying to decide which one do I pick? I have a few more. So one of mine is the first 6 seconds of meeting someone is when the first impression is formed. The first 6 seconds. So that is probably a lot of times prior to you even opening your mouth. Isn't that interesting?
It's interesting, and I was sitting here being quiet because I did this exercise once where I went back. I had a relationship that I knew better, and I went back. It's like back to the first 6 seconds. I knew the minute I met this person that but I made excuses and I kept on with it. And so what I did as an exercise is I went back, good and bad, just named 10 relationships and went back to the first impression. And I'm telling you, Amy, it's like if I would have went with my first impression, which I'm not trying to say that I've got some godly manner to me, but if I would have went with my first impression, it almost always ended up in that relationship as I thought in that initial impression. But we fight ourselves to say, who am I to judge someone in 6 seconds? But I'm telling you, I named the good and bad. And
Yeah.
I would tell everybody do that and see if your first impression is there were a couple that didn't,
Yeah.
but
Your
it's
gut
good
says
to
a
know
lot.
from your gut says a lot, but it's good to say from both sides is how important your first impression is as the person when you're meeting somebody and you're giving them your full attention, that they're driving their impression of you right away too.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly. So I just Thursday night, I met two people for the very first time. It was one of Tom's colleagues and his wife. Um, and I was thinking of this the first 6 seconds. So we were standing outside the restaurant and we saw them getting out of the Uber and walking towards us. And I remember, so I was trying to okay, first 6 seconds was prior to us even actually coming together on the sidewalk. And I remember my thought processes, oh, they were so nice to the Uber driver. You know what I mean? Like I could hear them talking and I could see how they were walking. So it was a lot of body language and observing. And I was instantly oh, I like them, and then the wife came up and she hugged me. We have the same name. So I was she was like, oh, and so I was going through this first 6 seconds. I'm like, yep, before she even opened her mouth or he opened his mouth, I was like, oh, they seem like nice people. They seem like good people.
That's good. I'm gonna have to think about that the next time I meet someone for the first time.
Yeah.
And then assess myself too.
Yeah. It was interesting. So, all right. So that is all we have today. Interesting conversation. Thanks for doing some research on this and finding some statistics. I don't know. Do you do a lot of speaking at all?
I do. It's on and off. Right now, I'm trying to create some new content with some passion projects I have. So it's funny you ask because I'm getting ready to kick that off. How about you?
I do. And I went to a session one time on how to connect with different audiences. And one of the things they said was using statistics because so one of them is storytelling, one of them was statistics, and one of them was music. And I can't remember what else, but it was different people connect to different things. And so statistics typically is something that if you have men in the audience, they will grasp to the statistics. That's another observation. And then women will grasp to the storytelling. And then the music is kind of, just depends on the person. But anyway,
That's
I
great.
thought
Yeah,
that
I
was
love
very
that.
interesting. Yeah. So statistics are good to know. And always, I'm always fascinated by statistics.
Awesome. Well, some things to ponder throughout the day. I'll share with Garrett and we'll see what we come up with. And
Yeah, and I'm gonna go outside for a walk and try to up my 93% or lower my 93%. All right, have a good week. I'll talk to you later. Bye,
bye-bye.
Sandy.